All right, welcome. In this revision explainer, we're going to tackle one of the biggest, most mind-bending puzzles in all of philosophy and theology, the nature of God. We're going to break down the key attributes, the major philosophical arguments, and all the critical evaluation you'll need. Let's get right into it.
Okay, probably the best way to think about this whole topic is to imagine you're trying to pack a wardrobe. You've got all these perfect qualities, all powerful, all knowing, all loving. But when you try and cram them all in together, the doors just won't shut. They seem to clash with each other. This whole explainer is about how philosophers have tried to rearrange that metaphorical wardrobe to make everything fit. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the core problem, the dilemma itself. Then we'll unpack each of God's attributes one by one. After that, we'll see how three key thinkers try to solve the puzzle. And finally, we'll get into the really important stuff, the critical evaluation and analysis. So, what is the fundamental problem here? Well, it all comes down to a question of coherence. Can God have all these perfect, unlimited qualities at the same time without it all collapsing into a big logical mess? I mean, think about it. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, then why is there so much suffering in the world? That's the kind of tension we're going to be exploring. Right, let's get into the details. First, we need to make sure our foundations are rock solid. We're going to define each of God's main attributes, and as we do, we'll immediately look at the philosophical problems that each one creates. First up is omnipotence. On the surface, that seems simple enough, all-powerful. But what does all-powerful really mean? Can God do absolutely anything, even stuff that's logically impossible? This is a huge point of debate. And this is where we hit our first major philosophical split. On one side, you've got Descartes. He argued that God's power is so absolute, he's not even bound by the laws of logic. He could make a square circle if he wanted to. But on the other side, thinkers like Aquinas and more recently Swinburne totally disagree. They say God can do everything that is logically possible. For them, a square circle isn't a thing God fails to do, it's just a meaningless collection of words like colorless green. So, and this is crucial, they don't see this as a limit on God's power at all. Next up, omniscience, all-knowing. Again, sounds straightforward, until you bring humans into the picture. If God knows everything, that has to include the future. But if God knows with absolute certainty what I'm going to eat for breakfast tomorrow, did I ever really have a free choice? This is that classic clash between God's total knowledge and our free will. And finally, benevolence, being all good and all loving. This attribute brings up one of the most famous problems in philosophy, Plato's Euthyphro dilemma. It goes like this. Is something good simply because God commands it? If so, goodness seems totally arbitrary. God could command us to murder, and that would suddenly become good. Or does God command something because it's already good? If that's the case, then it seems there's a standard of goodness outside of God, which kind of limits his power, right? It's a real philosophical pickle. So we've got these clashing attributes. How on earth do we solve this? Well, the key for our three main philosophers is to completely rethink God's relationship with time. Boethius, Anselm, and Swinburne each give us a very different way of trying to organize that messy wardrobe we talked about. Let's start with Boethius. His massive idea is that God is timeless. He doesn't exist within our timeline of past, present, and future. Nope. God exists entirely outside of it, in what you could call an eternal, unchanging now. People often use a film analogy to explain this. You and I, we experience our lives frame by frame, one moment at a time, but God is outside the timeline, able to see the entire film, the beginning, the middle, and the end, all at once. Boethius calls this a simultaneous present. Now, this is a pretty elegant solution to the free will problem. God doesn't foreknow your future actions, he simply knows them as they happen in his eternal present. He sees you making your choice freely as it occurs. Okay, next we have Anselm, who takes Boethius's timeless idea and, sort of builds on it. For Anselm, you can think about time as a fourth dimension, alongside height, width, and depth. But God isn't just outside this fourth dimension. He actually contains and encompasses it. Anselm put it perfectly himself. You are not in place or in time, but all things are in you. And that is a really key difference. God isn't some distant observer like in Boethius's model. Instead, for Anselm, all of time and space are within God. This means our free choices are known to God because they are happening inside of God's very being. And now for something completely different. We have Richard Swinburne. He looks at the timeless view of Boethius and Anselm and completely rejects it. Swinburne argues that a timeless God isn't biblical and can't actually have a relationship with us. So his solution? God exists within time, just like we do. He is everlasting.
So here's the crucial point. For Swinburne, God moves through time with us. He has no beginning and no end, sure, but he experiences a past, a present, and a future. So what does this do to omniscience? Well, it means God knows the past and the present perfectly. But, and this is a huge but, he cannot know the future choices of free people, because those choices haven't been made yet. It's just not logically possible to know an undetermined future. This definitely saves human freedom, but it forces us to completely redefine what we mean by all-knowing.
Okay, so we've laid out all the key ideas. Now for the most important part, especially for your exam, the analysis and evaluation, the AO2. Which of these views is actually the most convincing? Let's start weighing up the pros and cons.
The big strength of a timeless God is that it keeps God perfect. He's unchanging, his knowledge is complete, and it gives us that clever solution to the free will problem. The weaknesses, though, are pretty significant. How can you have a personal relationship with a being that experiences all of your life in a single instant? How can a timeless God answer a prayer, which happens at a very specific moment? It risks making God seem very, very remote and impersonal. Now, Swinburne's everlasting God, well, this feels much more personal, doesn't it? This is a God who can respond in real time, who can be in a genuine relationship with us, much like the God you often read about in the Bible. But the cost is huge. You have to give up the traditional idea that God knows absolutely everything. And what's more, if God is in time and can act, it makes the problem of evil even sharper. Why doesn't this powerful, loving God step in more often? So, as you start to build your own arguments for an essay, these are the big questions you really need to wrestle with. And listen, there is no single right answer here. The goal is to show the examiner that you understand the trade-offs. If you argue for the timeless view, how do you explain a personal, loving God? If you defend the everlasting view, how do you deal with a God who isn't fully omniscient? This is where the real philosophical work gets done.
And that leaves us with the final massive question. After trying to fit all those perfect clothes into that one wardrobe, do we end up with a neat, coherent picture? Or do we have to accept that maybe the traditional attributes of God just aren't logically consistent, forcing us to either ditch some of them or admit that the whole concept is a paradox beyond our understanding? That is the challenge for you to resolve in your own conclusion.